Do you remember the star Tau Ceti and its planet Aurora, where thousands of Earth colonists first landed? We left them right at the moment of their descent towards their new home. But what happened next, and what was their ultimate fate? If you want to know, keep watching. The first problem wasn't the air, which, despite its 25% oxygen content that caused headaches and dizziness, was still breathable, nor the gravity at 87% of Earth's that initially made everyone clumsy and disoriented. The real first problem was the pollen, invisible to the naked eye but omnipresent like an impalpable fog. The pollen from Aurora's pale green forests turned out to be a cocktail of allergens completely unknown to the human immune system. Captain Kian Soto, while supervising the unloading of the shuttles in what they designated Landing Zone Alpha, a relatively open clearing in the alien forest, noted in his diary that within 3 hours of landing, 60% of the colonists had developed symptoms that Dr. Sarah Chen cataloged as Auroran respiratory syndrome. Eyes weeping thick yellowish fluid, nasal passages swelling until breathing was completely blocked, purple rashes wherever skin had been exposed to the open air. But the pollen was just the beginning. David Park, the mission's chief botanist, was the first to directly touch the local vegetation, what from orbit had looked like harmless pale green moss. Within 30 seconds, his hand was covered in pulsing blisters. Within 5 minutes, his entire arm had swollen to twice its normal size, the skin taking on a bluish coloration that would take weeks to fade. The plants of Aurora, they quickly discovered through painful direct experience, produced an incredible variety of dermal toxins, alkaloids, and phenolic compounds that had probably evolved as defense against local herbivores. Every plant species seemed to have its own particular poison. The bioluminescent ferns growing in the shade of larger trees caused immediate lancing burns. The spiral-leafed vines induced delayed dermatitis that appeared days later with unbearable itching, while contact with the bark of the dominant trees, towering up to 80 meters with copper-colored trunks, caused temporary local paralysis that could last hours. Dr. Chen immediately established strict protocols. No one could go outside without completely sealed suits. Every return required 20 minutes of decontamination with chemical showers and UV rays, and everyone had to take massive doses of antihistamines that caused constant drowsiness, but were the only way to survive the allergenic assault. The attempt to clear an area to build the permanent settlement revealed yet another problem. Aurora's vegetation regrew at an impossible rate. What they dubbed purple grass, a ground cover similar to earth grass but purple in color with a rubbery texture, could regenerate 30 centimeters in a single 18-hour Auroran night. Trees, when cut, sprouted new shoots from their roots within 48 hours, and within a week the cleared area was completely overgrown again. It was like fighting a plant hydra that regenerated faster than they could destroy it. It was young engineer Pavl Dmitriev, just 26, but with a pragmatism that made him wise beyond his years, who proposed the solution that would define the colony's architecture for decades to come. Instead of finding the forest on the surface, they would build underground. The first seismic surveys revealed that Aurora's subsurface was crossed by extensive natural cavities, probably formed by ancient lava flows when the planet was more geologically active. Moreover, as ecologist James Morrison noted, in the deepest caves they found the only area of Aurora apparently devoid of life. No spores, no pollen, no plant toxins, just sterile rock and silence. Excavating and adapting the caves required 4 months of backbreaking work. Crews worked in 6-hour shifts, the maximum the doctors allowed, with oxygen levels so high they caused what Chen had dubbed hyperoxia euphoria, a state of excitement and reduced judgment similar to mild intoxication. During the excavations, they encountered Aurora's first animal life forms, creatures resembling centipedes up to 30 centimeters long, blind and translucent, that fled from flashlight beams while emitting a sharp hiss. They called them cave wraiths and discovered they were completely harmless, feeding only on fungi growing on the damp walls. More concerning were what Morrison dubbed crystal bats, flying creatures with membranous wings that reflected light like prisms, which when disturbed attacked in swarms, emitting ultrasounds so intense it caused disorientation and nausea. 3 people died during that period, 2 from collapses during excavation, and 1, technician James Carisi, from what the autopsy revealed to be anaphylactic shock caused by the bite of what looked like a spider but had 10 legs and secreted a neurotoxic venom. Food quickly became the central issue. The mothership's supplies would last a maximum of 2 Earth years, which on Aurora equaled about 22 local months, given the different orbital period. Javier Martinez Jr., who'd inherited not just his father's name, but also his passion for agronomy, found himself facing what seemed an impossible challenge. Aurora's soil was anything but sterile. It teemed with microbial, fungal life and small invertebrates similar to nematodes, but none of these organisms were compatible with Earth agriculture. In fact, the local microbes aggressively attacked Earth plant roots, dissolving them into putrid mush within days. They tried sterilizing the soil with gamma rays, but this made it toxic to Earth plants. They tried importing beneficial bacteria from Earth, but these were quickly overwhelmed by the local microbial flora, much more aggressive and adapted to the oxygen-rich environment. The solution came from an unexpected source. Lisa Wong, a marine biologist who theoretically shouldn't have had much to do on a planet where the ocean seemed populated only by phosphorescent algae and primitive jellyfish the size of beach balls, discovered that water from Aurora's shallow oceans, despite being brackish with a chemical composition significantly different from Earth's, could be used for hydroponics if properly treated. The purification process was complex and energy-intensive, requiring electrolysis to separate the salts, reverse osmosis filters to remove heavy minerals, and intensive UV treatment to kill aquatic microorganisms that would otherwise colonize the hydroponic systems. But it worked. The first hydroponic lettuce grew in 45 Auroran days, pale and tasteless, but edible. Martinez rapidly expanded the program, converting 3 of the largest caves into underground greenhouses, lit by LEDs powered by solar panels that, thanks to Aurora's closer proximity to Tau Ceti than Earth to the Sun, produced 15% more energy. But while the colonists tried to solve immediate survival problems, social tensions emerged that no one had foreseen. The colony's population had been carefully selected to represent humanity's diversity, but this also meant diversity of opinions on how to proceed. A group led by Dr. Mikhail Volkov, a Russian astrophysicist who'd been among the mission's main supporters, began arguing that attempting to colonize Aurora was a mistake, that the planet was too hostile, that they should use remaining resources to explore other options in the Tau Ceti system. His calculations showed that if there were at least 2 other planets in the habitable zone, designated Tau Ceti F and Tau Ceti H according to Earth astronomical nomenclature, and that with the Ark's residual fuel still in orbit, they could send exploration probes and potentially even crewed missions. Volkov had done his calculations with obsessive precision. Tau Ceti F orbited at 1.35 AU from the star with a period of 642 Earth days, estimated mass 3.9 times Earth's, which meant surface gravity probably intolerable for humans long term, but climate simulations suggested milder temperatures and an atmosphere potentially more similar to Earth's. Tau Ceti H was even more interesting, 1.94 AU from the star, year of 951 Earth days, mass only 1.83 times Earth, enough to maintain a dense atmosphere but not so much as to crush colonists under its own weight. The debate that followed divided the colony in what chroniclers called the First Schism. On one side, the rooted, led by Soto, who argued they'd already invested too much in Aurora to abandon it now, that every day that passed they learned more about how to survive, that a difficult but known planet was better than the unknown of a new world. On the other, the Seekers, Volkov's followers, who argued that every day spent on Aurora was a day wasted, that they were just postponing the inevitable, that plant toxins accumulating in their bodies would kill them slowly, that already 15% of the population showed liver damage from chronic exposure to plants' alkaloids, and that children born on the planet showed developmental delays probably caused by environmental neurotoxins. The conflict reached its climax when a group of Seekers attempted to take control of the main cargo shuttle to return to the Ark and prepare a mission to Tau Ceti F. Colony security, led by Major Patricia Hayes, had to use tear gas to stop them. The first time force had been used against other colonists. The incident caused a leadership crisis that Soto handled with, in what retrospect, was considered Solomonic wisdom. Instead of punishing the rebels or trying to suppress dissent, he proposed what he called the Divergence Protocol. Whoever wanted to try their luck on another world was free to do so, but would receive only their proportional share of resources, not a gram more. Of the 9,887 colonists who'd survived the landing, 2,341 chose to follow Volkov. Dividing the resources was a painful process that required weeks of negotiations, with detailed inventories of every bolt, every seed, every milligram of medicine. Finally, on March 19, 2189, according to the Earth calendar they still stubbornly maintained, the Seeker shuttles lifted off toward the Ark to prepare for their journey to Tau Ceti F. For those who remained, the Seekers' departure was both a loss and a liberation. They'd lost a quarter of the population, including some of the most qualified specialists, but they also eliminated the main source of internal conflict. Soto reorganized the colony according to what he called the Century Plan, a long-term vision that accepted Aurora as it was instead of wishing it were different. The first step was to massively expand the hydroponic greenhouses, and by the end of the first year after the schism, there were 20 greenhouses producing not just basic vegetables, but also genetically modified wheat to grow under artificial light conditions, soybeans for protein, and even more dwarf fruit trees that Martinez had managed to keep alive. The animal protein problem was solved in a way that on Earth would have been considered disgusting, but on Aurora quickly became normal. Breeding Earth insects and surprisingly domesticating some local arthropods, crickets and black soldier fly larvae imported from Earth required very little space, reproduced rapidly, converted plant waste into protein with 60% efficiency, and most importantly, didn't seem to particularly suffer from Aurora's atmosphere if raised in partially sealed containers. But the real discovery was that the cave crabs, terrestrial crustaceans the size of a fist that lived in underground lakes, were not only edible after proper cooking that neutralized their natural toxins, but had a taste surprisingly similar to lobster. Farming these crustaceans became one of Aurora's first real food industries, with tanks carved into rock where they were fed plant waste from the hydroponic greenhouses. The second generation, those born on the planet in the first 5 years, showed physical adaptations that doctors documented with scientific method and parental concern. The kids averaged 10 centimeters taller than their parents, an effect of reduced gravity on bone development. Their lungs were 20% larger with greater alveolar density, an adaptation to the oxygen-rich atmosphere. But the most interesting adaptation was psychological. These children didn't suffer from the claustrophobia that affected many adults forced to live underground. For them, the caves were home. Aurora's reddish sky with its 3 moons was normal. The metallic taste of recycled water was simply how water was supposed to taste. Hey Curious Squad, before moving on, be sure to subscribe to our channel, clicking on the notification bell, and leave us a thumbs up so you don't miss out on our daily videos. In year 2195, 6 years after their departure, a message arrived from the Seekers. They'd landed on Tau Ceti F, and the news wasn't good. The planet did have an atmosphere, but it was 60% carbon dioxide with traces of methane and ammonia, completely unbreathable. The gravity, 1.7 times Earth's, caused immediate cardiac problems and debilitating joint pain. Worse still, the planet was extremely geologically active, with volcanoes continuously erupting ash into the atmosphere, creating a runaway greenhouse effect with surface temperatures reaching 90 degrees Celsius at the equator. Volkov, in his last message before communications cut off, admitted his mistake. Aurora was difficult, but Tau Ceti F is impossible. We'll attempt to reach Tau Ceti H with remaining fuel. If you don't hear from us within 2 years, consider us lost. News of the Seekers' failure had a paradoxical effect on Aurora's colony. Instead of demoralizing them, it united them. There were no more doubts, no more alternatives. Aurora was home, and they had to make it work. Martinez, who'd meanwhile become the unofficial leader of the agricultural sector, proposed an ambitious project, gradually terraforming small sections of Aurora, not the entire planet, which would be impossible, but small sealed valleys where they would create Earth microclimates. The project required enormous resources and probably generations to complete, but it gave the colony a long-term purpose, something to work toward beyond mere survival. The first attempt at what they called Project Eden was an educational disaster. Having chosen a 5-kilometer diameter crater with naturally high walls that could be sealed, they spent 2 years building a geodesic dome of transparent polymers reinforced with carbon fiber. On Inauguration Day, when they released the Earth atmosphere they'd patiently produced and stored, the dome lasted exactly 14 hours before the surrounding vegetation, stimulated by the sudden atmospheric change, launched billions of spores that clogged the filters, while underground roots, attracted by the moisture, penetrated the foundations with force that shattered concrete like paper. The lesson was clear. They couldn't fight Aurora's nature. They had to work with it, not against it. The second attempt was more modest and more successful. Instead of sealing a crater from above, they dug horizontal galleries into a rock face, creating a series of artificially lit internal terraces where they could completely control the environment. It wasn't the earthly paradise some dreamed of, but it was green, it was alive, and most importantly, it was theirs. Colony children played there. Adults went there to relax. Couples went there to get married. It became the colony's symbolic heart, proof they could not only survive, but create beauty in that alien world. As the colony grew and stabilized, new social dynamics emerged. The quasi-military hierarchical structure that made sense during the voyage and first years of colonization was beginning to break down. Young people born on Aurora didn't understand why they had to obey rules established for a spaceship they'd never seen. The census of 2200, 15 years after landing, showed a population of 11,432 people, with 3,891 born on Aurora. The birth rate exceeded the death rate for the first time since departure from Earth, a sign the colony was finally thriving. But it also showed worrying divisions. Essentially, 3 classes had formed: the founders, who'd arrived from Earth and held most positions of power; the transitionals, born during the voyage or in Aurora's first years, who felt suspended between 2 worlds; and the natives, born and raised on Aurora, who were beginning to see the founders as relics of an irrelevant past. It was a native, Maria Santos Chen, born in 2189 to second-generation parents, who catalyzed what historians call the Silent Revolution. At 16 Auroran years, equivalent to about 14 Earth years, she led what began as a student protest against the requirement to study Earth history and geography instead of focusing on subjects more practical for life on Aurora. The protest quickly expanded into a broader movement, demanding proportional representation on the Colony Council for those born on Aurora, revision of educational curricula, and above all, the right to make decisions about the colony's future without being bound by what they called Earth's ghost. Soto, now 80 and visibly worn from years of leadership in extreme conditions, handled the crisis with what was later recognized as his last great statesman-like decision. Instead of suppressing the movement or making symbolic concessions, he proposed a complete restructuring of colonial government. The new system, ratified in 2201, divided power between a Senate of Founders, which maintained control over technical matters and preservation of Earth knowledge, and an Auroran Assembly, democratically elected among all residents, which had authority over daily matters and future planning. It wasn't perfect, and there would be conflicts for years, but it avoided a violent rupture that could have destroyed the colony. Meanwhile, Aurora's exploration continued to reveal surprises. An expedition led by geologist Hans Mueller discovered 300 kilometers from the main colony site deposits of what initially seemed to be normal quartz, but which analysis revealed to be a crystalline form never seen on Earth, with extraordinary piezoelectric properties. The crystals, christened Muellerite in honor of their discoverer, could generate electricity when subjected to pressure with 40% efficiency, far superior to any Earth material. The deposit zone was also habitat for what they called prism lizards, reptiles about a meter long with scales that refracted light, creating moving rainbows. Apparently harmless, but territorial, defending their nests dug near the crystals with painful though non-venomous bites. Suddenly, they had access to an energy source that could supplement the solar panels constantly damaged by sticky pollen and moss growth that colonized them despite chemical treatments. Mining and processing Muellerite became Aurora's first real industry. It required developing completely new techniques, since the crystals were extremely fragile and lost their properties if heated above 50 degrees Celsius. But when they managed to perfect the process, the impact was transformative. With abundant energy, they could expand greenhouses, increase potable water production, and most importantly, begin locally producing electronic components instead of depending on the Ark's increasingly scarce supplies. In 2210, a message finally arrived from the Seekers, or rather, from what remained of them. Only 441 of the original 2,341 had survived the journey to Tau Ceti H, and what they found was, in the words of the expedition's new leader after Volkov's death, a frozen paradise. The planet had abundant water, an atmosphere with 18% oxygen, temperatures that reached -5 degrees Celsius at the equator on the warmest days. Technically habitable, but at the extreme limit. They were surviving, barely, in heated domes, but the message was clear. There was no future there. They requested permission to return to Aurora. The debate over whether to allow the Seekers' return was the most heated since the Silent Revolution. The natives were generally opposed, seeing them as traitors who had abandoned the colony in its time of need and now wanted to return only because they failed. The founders were divided. Some saw the moral duty to welcome other humans in distress. Others feared the return would destabilize the hard-won peace. In the end, it was Maria Santos Chen, now 21 and a member of the Auroran Assembly, who proposed the compromise. The Seekers could return, but as immigrants, not as automatic colony members. They had to earn citizenship through 5 years of community service and accept the social structures that had developed in their absence. When the Seekers arrived in 2212, they were shadows of what they departed. Tau Ceti H's gravity, 1.3 times Earth's, had caused chronic cardiovascular problems. The constant cold had required caloric consumption their limited resources couldn't sustain, resulting in widespread malnutrition. But they also brought valuable knowledge. They developed heat conservation techniques that could be useful during Aurora's nights. They perfected even more efficient water recycling systems. And most importantly, they'd mapped the Tau Ceti system in detail. information that would be valuable for future generations. Integrating the seekers was difficult but ultimately successful. Many of them, humiliated by failure and grateful for the welcome, became some of the colony's most productive citizens. They brought a unique perspective, having seen what was out there, and this paradoxically was considered more important than what they'd previously done on Aurora. One of them, engineer Catherine Walsh, developed a new type of underground habitat that combined Tau Ceti H's thermal insulation techniques with materials available on Aurora, allowing colony expansion into zones previously considered uninhabitable. In 2221, the colony celebrated the 35th anniversary of landing, with a population of 15,231 people. It was no longer a survival outpost, but a real society, with its own culture, traditions, conflicts, and joys. Children born in recent years knew no home other than Aurora. For them, Earth was mythology, like Atlantis or El Dorado, a fabulous place the elders talked about but which had no real relevance to their lives. They had their own myths now. The story of how Martinez grew the first Auroran tomato, how Mueller discovered the crystals that powered the colony, how Santos Chen united founders and natives. The colony's architecture had evolved into something unique, neither terrestrial nor alien but distinctly Auroran. Dwellings were carved into rock but with glass ceramic facades that captured and diffused the light of the three moons, creating color plays no Earth architecture could have imagined. Corridors followed the cave's natural curves instead of imposing rectilinear geometries, creating spaces that were both organic and artificial. The underground gardens, lit by Muellerite-powered LEDs, had become living works of art, with earth plants modified to produce bioluminescence, creating fairy forests that glowed in the dark. But the deepest change was biological. Doctors had meticulously documented how each generation born on Aurora diverged more from their terrestrial model. They weren't mutations in the science fiction sense, but epigenetic adaptations, changes in gene expression caused by the environment. Third-generation natives had bone density 15% lower than Earth's standard, but with a more efficient trabecular structure that paradoxically made them more resistant to fractures in reduced gravity. Their eyes had developed greater sensitivity to red light, adapting to Tau Ceti spectrum. Their metabolism was more efficient at processing the limited available diet, requiring on average 300 fewer calories per day than their Earth ancestors. In 2226, 40 years after landing, Kian Soto died in his sleep at age 103 Earth years. His funeral was the biggest event in colony history, with all 16,892 residents participating somehow. He was buried according to his wishes, not in a sealed tomb, but directly in Aurora's soil without a coffin, to become part of the planet that had become our home. His epitaph, carved in native rock, simply said, "He brought us to the stars brought us home." Soto's death symbolically marked the end of the Founders era. The new council leader, jointly elected by the Senate and Assembly, was Marcus Thompson Aurora, son of a founder and a native, whose double surname reflected the colony's new hybrid identity. Under his leadership, the colony undertook the most ambitious project to date, building a real surface city. No longer just underground outposts connected by tunnels, but a city under domes, where people could walk outdoors, see the sky, feel the wind, even if filtered through atmospheric barriers. The project, called New Aurora, required 5 years of construction and the colony's combined resources. The domes were built with a new composite material that combined Muellerite with polymers produced by genetically modified bacteria, creating a structure that was transparent, flexible enough to withstand seasonal winds, and most importantly, treated with a coating that prevented plant spores from attaching and germinating on the surface. The battle against invasive vegetation was constant, Maintenance crews had to daily remove chutes attempting to penetrate through every tiny crack, and a 10-meter perimeter around the domes was kept sterile with nightly UV irradiation and applications of herbicides developed specifically for Aurora's plants. Inside the domes, the atmosphere was filtered to remove pollen and spores, maintained at 21% oxygen like on Earth, finally allowing colonists to breathe without antihistamines. On Inauguration Day in 2230, when the first residents moved into surface dwellings, it was declared a colonial holiday, Aurora Day, to be celebrated every year. In 2236, 50 years after landing, a complete census showed a population of 21,456 people, with fewer than 500 original founders still alive. The only ones to raise their heads each night to look at a modest magnitude 2.6 star that glowed in Aurora's sky in the constellation Boötes, a yellowish star they once called home. Okay guys, is there anything you don't understand about what we've told you? If so, let us know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about the first interstellar exodus, check out the video, Annotated Chronicle of the First Interstellar Voyage.